Kelly had just moved into her dream house 3 weeks ago. It was a cozy little place with a front porch, a small yard, and the best part was that it was completely outside any homeowner association. She had specifically looked for a house that wasn't controlled by an HOA because she'd heard too many nightmare stories from friends. She wanted the freedom to paint her door whatever color she liked, plant flowers without permission, and just live her life in peace. She was in the garage organizing some tools on a Saturday afternoon when she heard this really aggressive knocking on her front door. Not the friendly neighbor kind of knock, but the kind that made you think something was wrong. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked to the door, wondering if there was some kind of emergency. When she opened it, there stood a woman, probably in her late 50s, dressed like she was going to a business meeting even though it was the weekend. She had this leather folder tucked under her arm, and the kind of expression on her face that said she was not there to welcome anyone to the neighborhood. Before Kelly could even say hello, the woman started talking. "I'm Linda Richardson, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowner Association," she announced. Like Kelly was supposed to be impressed or something. "And we need to discuss your numerous violations immediately." Kelly blinked, confused. Violations? She'd barely been there long enough to unpack all her boxes. "I'm sorry, what violations are you talking about?" Linda didn't wait for an invitation. She just stepped closer to the doorway and opened her leather folder, pulling out what looked like printed photos. "Your mailbox is the wrong color. Our community standards require all mailboxes to be black or forest green. Yours is blue. That's violation number 1. Kelly looked over at her mailbox. Yeah, it was blue. A nice sky blue that she thought looked cheerful. "Okay, but I don't think I'm part of your HOA," she said politely. Linda acted like she didn't even hear her. She flipped to another photo. "You have garden gnomes in your front flower bed. Decorative lawn ornaments are strictly prohibited in our community. That's violation number 2. And this morning I observed your vehicle parked in your driveway at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. All vehicles must be garaged during daytime hours on weekends to maintain curb appeal." Now Kelly was really confused. "Wait, hold on. My car was in my own driveway? That's a violation?"
"It certainly is," Linda snapped.
"These rules exist for a reason. They maintain property values and ensure our neighborhood remains the most desirable in the area." Kelly took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Look, I appreciate you stopping by, but I specifically bought this house because it's not part of any HOA. I checked all the paperwork before closing. My property isn't in your association." Linda's eyes narrowed. She pulled out another paper from her folder. "According to our records, every property on this street falls under Meadowbrook Heights HOA jurisdiction. You may not have been properly informed during your purchase, but ignorance of the rules doesn't exempt you from following them." "That's not what my real estate agent told me," Kelly said, feeling her own frustration building. "And it's not what my deed says either. I made absolutely sure of that." "Then your agent was mistaken," Linda said sharply. "I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. I know which properties are under our authority, and I'm here to inform you that you have 30 days to correct these violations or you'll be fined. The mailbox needs to be repainted. The lawn ornaments need to be removed. And you need to start parking your car in the garage during all daytime hours on weekends." Kelly couldn't believe what she was hearing. "But this is my property. I'm not in your HOA. I don't have to follow your rules." Linda's face started turning red. She jabbed her finger toward Kelly. "You listen to me. I don't care what you think you know about your property boundaries. I have been running this association for years, and I know every single property line in this development. Your house is within our jurisdiction whether you like it or not, and I will make you comply with our standards one way or another." "Are you threatening me?" Kelly asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "I'm informing you of the consequences of noncompliance," Linda said coldly. "Fines start at $500 per violation and increase from there. If you refuse to pay, we can place a lien on your property. So I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to proceed." Kelly felt her hands shaking a little, but she kept her voice calm. "I think you should leave my property now. And if you have any further concerns, you can communicate them through a lawyer, because I know for a fact that I'm not part of your association." Linda's expression turned even more sour. She shoved the papers back into her folder. "Fine, have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you. You'll be hearing from our attorney, and when we're done, you'll wish you'd just followed the rules like everyone else." She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, which was parked across the street. Kelly watched her drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it. Her hands were actually trembling now. What had just happened? She'd been in her house for less than a month, and already someone was threatening to sue her for things like having a blue mailbox and parking in her own driveway. She walked straight to her home office and started pulling out boxes of paperwork from her house closing. She found her deed, her survey map, the title insurance documents, everything. She spread them all out on her desk and started reading through every single page. The deed clearly stated her property boundaries. The survey map showed exactly where her lot lines were. And nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it mention anything about being part of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. She grabbed her phone and pulled up the neighborhood map online. She could see where the HOA properties were listed. Her house wasn't even on the same block as the nearest HOA property. There was actually a good amount of distance between her lot and where the HOA boundaries ended. Kelly sat back in her chair, relief washing over her. Linda was completely wrong. There was no way Kelly's property was part of that HOA. But the relief was quickly replaced by anger. Who did this woman think she was, showing up at someone's door and threatening them like that, making demands about mailbox colors and garden gnomes on property that wasn't even under her control? She thought about just ignoring it. Maybe Linda would realize her mistake and leave her alone, but something about the way that woman had talked to her, the way she'd pointed her finger and made threats, made Kelly think this wasn't going to go away quietly. Linda seemed like the type of person who didn't back down easily, even when she was completely in the wrong. Kelly decided to wait and see what happened next. Maybe it was all just bluster. Maybe Linda would check her records and figure out she'd made a mistake. But deep down, Kelly had a feeling this was just the beginning of something much bigger, and she was right. 2 weeks went by after Linda's visit, and Kelly had almost convinced herself that maybe the whole thing would just blow over. She'd gone about her life parking her car wherever she wanted, enjoying her blue mailbox and her little garden gnomes. She'd even added a few more flower pots to her front porch just because she could. Then one Tuesday afternoon, she came home from work to find a certified mail notice stuck to her door. Her stomach dropped. She knew exactly what this was going to be. The next morning, she went to the post office and picked up the envelope. Sure enough, it was from a law office. Henderson and Associates, attorneys at law. She sat in her car in the post office parking lot and opened it with shaking hands. The letter was 3 pages long and written in that formal legal language that makes everything sound more serious and scary than it needs to be. But the basic message was clear enough. Linda's HOA was demanding that Kelly pay $15,000 in fines for various violations of their community standards. $15,000. Kelly had to read that number 3 times to make sure she wasn't seeing things. The letter listed out all these supposed violations: the blue mailbox, the garden decorations, parking violations, failure to maintain lawn height standards, which was ridiculous because she'd literally mowed her lawn the previous weekend. There were even fines listed for things she didn't even have, like having a basketball hoop in her driveway, which she definitely did not own. But the worst part was the claim the letter made. It said that Kelly's property had been mistakenly excluded from the official HOA records due to a clerical error years ago, but that historically and legally, her property had always been meant to be part of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Therefore, she was bound by all their rules and regulations and owed back fines for the entire time she'd lived there, plus all the violations they'd documented. Kelly felt sick to her stomach. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake or intimidation tactic. She drove straight home and went directly to her filing cabinet. She pulled out every single document related to her house purchase. The deed, the title search, the survey, the closing documents, the title insurance policy, everything. She spread it all out on her dining room table and went through each document carefully. Her property deed clearly described her lot boundaries. The survey map, which had been done just before closing, showed exactly where her property lines were. She even had a copy of the original plat map for the neighborhood from when it was first developed. Her property was definitely, absolutely, without any question outside the HOA boundaries. The nearest HOA property was almost 200 feet away from her lot line. Kelly knew she needed help. This was way beyond her ability to handle alone. She started searching online for real estate attorneys in her area. She found one with good reviews who specialized in property disputes and HOA cases. His name was David Chen, and his office was only about 20 minutes away. She called first thing the next morning and explained the situation to the receptionist. The woman on the phone actually laughed a little when Kelly described what was happening. "Oh, you definitely need to come in," she said. "David will want to see this. Can you come this afternoon?" Kelly took a half-day off work and drove to the attorney's office with her box of documents. David was probably in his early 40s, wearing a casual suit, and he had the kind of friendly face that immediately put her at ease. She sat down in his office and handed him the threatening letter from Linda's attorney. He read it silently, and then, to her surprise, he started chuckling. "I'm sorry," he said, looking up at her. "I'm not laughing at your stress. I'm laughing because this is one of the most absurd cases of HOA overreach I've seen in my 15 years of practice. And I've seen some doozies. So it's not just me?" Kelly asked. "This really is as crazy as it seems?" "Oh, it's worse than crazy," David said. "It's potentially fraud. Let me see your property documents." Kelly pulled out everything and handed it over. David spent about 20 minutes going through each page, making notes, pulling up information on his computer. Finally, he sat back and looked at her with a serious expression. "Okay, here's the situation," he said. "Your property is absolutely 100% not part of this HOA. There's no clerical error. There's no historical mistake. Your lot was never part of their development and never under their jurisdiction. These boundaries are crystal clear." Kelly felt relief wash over her. "So I can just ignore this letter?" "Well, not exactly," David said. "Because they've actually filed a legal threat, we need to respond. But here's the thing that makes this really interesting. What they're doing goes beyond just being wrong. They're making false legal claims. They're demanding money they have no right to. And they're using the legal system to harass you. That's not just a mistake. That could be considered harassment, and depending on how this plays out, potentially even extortion." "What does that mean for me?" Kelly asked. David leaned forward. "It means we're going to respond to this letter very firmly. We're going to make it crystal clear that their claims are baseless and that if they continue with this harassment, you'll have grounds to countersue for legal fees, damages, and harassment. Most of the time when HOAs get a letter like that from an attorney, they back down immediately because they realize they've messed up. And if they don't back down, then we go to court, and honestly, that would be the easiest case I've ever won," David said with a smile. "Because we have every single document. We need to prove beyond any doubt that you're not part of their HOA. It would take a judge about 5 minutes to see through their nonsense." Kelly felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. "So what do we do next?" David pulled out a legal pad and started writing notes. "First, I'm going to draft a response to their attorney. I'm going to include copies of your deed, your survey, and the official HOA boundaries from the county records. I'm going to make it very clear that their claims are false, and that any further harassment will result in legal action from our side. I'll also request that they pay your legal fees for having to respond to this frivolous threat." "Will they actually pay that?" "Probably not immediately," David admitted, "but it puts them on notice. It shows we're serious and that we're not going to be bullied. Most HOA boards, when they see a response like this from an attorney, will back off fast. The problem is that you've got this Linda person who seems to be on some kind of power trip. People like that sometimes don't respond to logic. So she might actually try to sue me even though she's completely wrong." David nodded. "It's possible. Some people are so convinced they're right, or so stubborn that they'll push forward even when they have no case. But if she does, we'll be ready. And honestly, if this goes to court, it's going to cost her and the HOA a lot more than it costs you. Because when we win, and we will win, the judge can order them to pay your legal fees." Kelly signed the paperwork to hire David and wrote a check for the retainer fee. It hurt to spend that money on something that shouldn't even be happening. But she felt so much better having someone on her side who actually knew what they were doing. Over the next week, David sent his response letter to Linda's attorney. It was firm, professional, and backed up with copies of all the relevant documents. Kelly waited anxiously to see what would happen next. She didn't have to wait long. 5 days later, she got another certified letter. This time it wasn't from the attorney. It was directly from Linda, and it was even more aggressive than the first one. Linda claimed that David's letter was full of lies, that the documents were somehow falsified, and that Kelly was going to regret not cooperating. The letter ended with a threat to file a formal lawsuit within 30 days if Kelly didn't agree to comply with all HOA rules and pay the fines. Kelly called David immediately. She read him the letter over the phone, her voice shaking with frustration and anger. When she finished, there was a pause. Then David said something that surprised her. She's actually going to do it. She's going to sue you. But you said most people back down when they get a letter from an attorney, Kelly said. Most reasonable people do, David replied. But Linda Richardson is not reasonable. I've actually dealt with her before on another case a few years ago. She's the type who would rather burn everything down than admit she's wrong. So yes, I think she's going to file this lawsuit. Kelly felt her heart sink. So what do? We prepare to win, David said confidently. And when we do, it's going to be spectacular. Linda made good on her threat. 3 weeks later, Kelly was officially served with a lawsuit. The process server showed up at her door on a Sunday morning, while she was still in her pajamas having coffee. She signed for the papers and closed the door, feeling like she might throw up. The lawsuit was even more ridiculous than the letters had been. It claimed that Kelly's property was historically part of the HOA, that she owed not just $15,000 in fines, but now $20,000 because she'd continued to violate their rules after being warned. It listed violations Kelly didn't even know about, like having her porch light on past 10 p.m., which apparently violated some quiet hours lighting ordinance in their HOA rules. Kelly called David immediately, even though it was Sunday. He told her not to worry, that they'd been expecting this and that they already had everything prepared to fight it. He scheduled a meeting for Monday morning to go over their strategy. When Kelly showed up at his office, David had another person with him. A woman named Rita who turned out to be a licensed surveyor. David had hired her to do a complete official survey of Kelly's property and to create a detailed report showing exactly where the property lines were in relation to the HOA boundaries. Rita had done her homework. She had maps, GPS coordinates, historical records, even old photographs of the neighborhood from when it was first built. She'd traced the HOA boundaries using the original plat maps filed with the county and compared them to current property records. Her conclusion was the same as everything else Kelly had. Kelly's property was nowhere near the HOA boundaries. Not even close. There was a full 180 feet between Kelly's property line and the nearest HOA property. David also had something else. He'd gotten a copy of the original HOA charter from when it was first created 20 years ago. The charter specifically listed every property address that was part of the HOA. Kelly's address wasn't on that list. It had never been on any version of the list. There was no clerical error. There was no historical mistake. Her property had simply never been part of the HOA, period. So how is Linda claiming that it is? Kelly asked. David pulled out another document. This is what their attorney filed with the lawsuit. It's a map that shows the HOA boundaries. Kelly looked at it. The map showed HOA boundaries that extended way beyond where they actually were. According to this map, Kelly's property and about 6 other properties were all inside the HOA jurisdiction. But this is completely wrong, Kelly said. Exactly, David replied, and that's what makes this so serious. This isn't just a simple disagreement about property lines. Someone deliberately altered this map to make it look like these properties are part of the HOA when they're not. That's fraud, Rita nodded. I compared this map to the official county records and the original HOA plat. Someone took the real boundaries and just drew new lines that include more properties. But if you look at the actual legal descriptions and the GPS coordinates, none of it matches up. This map is basically fiction. So what does that mean for the case? Kelly asked. It means we're not just going to win, David said with a slight smile. We're going to destroy their case so completely that Linda is going to wish she'd never started this. And depending on how the judge reacts to that fraudulent map, there could be serious consequences for her and whoever helped create it. Over the next 6 weeks, David prepared everything. He had Rita's official survey report. He had the original HOA charter. He had Kelly's deed, title insurance, and closing documents. He had the county property records. He even tracked down the original developer who had built the neighborhood 20 years ago, who provided a written statement confirming which properties were in the original HOA and which weren't. Kelly's property wasn't. Finally, the court date arrived. Kelly had barely slept the night before. She kept having stress dreams about judges yelling at her and HOA boards taking her house away. David had told her to relax, that this was going to be fine, but it was hard not to be nervous. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the county courthouse. Kelly met David in the lobby at 8:30. He had 2 large folders full of documents and looked completely calm. Ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Kelly said, her stomach in knots. They walked into the courtroom together. Linda was already there with her attorney, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit who Kelly had never seen before. Linda looked smug and confident, sitting up straight with her leather folder in her lap. When she saw Kelly walk in, she actually smiled a little, like she thought she'd already won. There were a few other people there, too. Some of them Kelly recognized as her neighbors, though she'd never really talked to them. They must have been part of the HOA or something, there to support Linda. The bailiff called the court to order and the judge walked in. He was probably in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He sat down, shuffled some papers, and looked up. "All right, let's get started. This is Richardson versus Kelly Thompson, case number." He rattled off some numbers. "Ms. Richardson, you're the plaintiff. You're claiming that Ms. Thompson's property is part of your homeowner association and that she owes fines for various violations. Is that correct?" Linda's attorney stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, that's correct. And Ms. Thompson, you're claiming your property is not part of this HOA and therefore you're not subject to their rules. Correct?" David stood up. "That's correct, Your Honor." "All right then, let's hear what you've got." Plaintiff goes first. Linda's attorney launched into his presentation. He talked about HOA rules and community standards and how important it was for everyone to follow the same guidelines. He showed the judge the list of violations they claimed Kelly had committed. He talked about property values and neighborhood cohesion and all sorts of things that sounded important, but didn't actually address the main question, which was whether Kelly's property was even part of the HOA in the first place. Then he pulled out the map. The altered map that showed Kelly's property inside the HOA boundaries. "As you can see, Your Honor, the defendant's property clearly falls within our jurisdiction according to our association boundaries." The judge looked at the map, then looked up. "This is your official boundary map?" "Yes, Your Honor. This accurately represents the Meadowbrook Heights HOA boundaries." "All right. Defense, your turn." David stood up and walked to the front. He didn't waste time on long speeches. He went straight to the evidence. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's entire case is based on that map, which is completely fraudulent. I'd like to present the actual official records." He handed a folder to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. "What you have there, Your Honor, is the defendant's property deed, which clearly describes the property boundaries. You also have the official survey conducted by a licensed surveyor last month, which I'm happy to have her testify to if needed. You have the original HOA charter from when it was created 20 years ago, which lists every property in the association, and the defendant's address is not on that list. You have the county property records showing exactly where the HOA boundaries are, and you have a current county GIS map showing all HOA properties in this area." The judge started flipping through the documents. The courtroom was completely quiet. Kelly could hear her own heart beating. Linda's smug expression was starting to fade. David continued. "If you compare the map submitted by the plaintiff to any of these official documents, you'll see that it doesn't match. The plaintiff's map shows boundaries that extend almost 200 feet beyond the actual HOA boundaries. The defendant's property is clearly, unquestionably, outside the HOA jurisdiction. It always has been, and there's never been any clerical error or historical mistake. The plaintiff's claims are completely without merit." The judge kept reading. He pulled out the HOA charter and read through the property list. He looked at the survey map. He compared it to Linda's altered map. His expression went from neutral to annoyed. Finally, he looked up. "Counselor," he said to Linda's attorney, "did you verify these boundary claims before filing this lawsuit?" Linda's attorney suddenly looked very uncomfortable. He glanced back at Linda, then at the judge. "Your Honor, I relied on the information provided to me by my client. She's the HOA president and assured me that these boundaries were accurate." "So you didn't check the county records? You didn't look at the actual HOA charter? You didn't verify any of this independently?" The attorney shifted his weight. "I relied on the documents provided by my client, Your Honor." The judge looked at Linda directly. "Ms. Richardson, do you want to explain to me how your boundary map is completely different from every official record on file with this county?" Linda stood up quickly. "Your Honor, those records are wrong. They've been wrong for years. There was a mistake when the HOA was originally filed and—" "That's enough," the judge said, cutting her off. He looked back down at the documents in front of him, shaking his head. The judge took off his reading glasses and set them down on the bench. He looked at the documents in front of him one more time. then looked up at Linda with an expression that made the whole courtroom go silent. Kelly could feel the tension in the air. Even Linda seemed to sense that things were not going the way she'd planned. "Ms. Richardson," the judge said slowly, "I've been on this bench for 17 years. I've seen a lot of cases. I've seen legitimate property disputes where boundaries were unclear, where there were good faith disagreements about jurisdiction. This is not one of those cases." Linda opened her mouth to say something, but the judge held up his hand. "The defendant's property is clearly, unequivocally outside your HOA boundaries. And I don't just mean by a few feet where there might be some legitimate confusion. According to the official county records, the licensed surveyor's report, and your own HOA's original charter, this property is nearly 200 feet away from the nearest HOA property. That's not a gray area. That's not a clerical error. That's not even in the same ballpark." He picked up Linda's altered map. "And this document you submitted as evidence? This doesn't match a single official record. Not the county plat maps. Not your original HOA charter, not the property deeds, not anything. Someone took your actual HOA boundaries and just drew new lines to include properties that aren't yours to control." Linda's face was turning red. "Your Honor, if you would just let me explain—" "I'm not done," the judge said firmly. "You didn't just file a baseless lawsuit. You filed it using fraudulent documentation. You demanded $20,000 from someone who has no legal obligation to you whatsoever. You threatened liens against her property. You used the legal system to harass a homeowner who did nothing wrong except buy a house outside your jurisdiction." Kelly watched as Linda's attorney quietly started packing up his briefcase. He'd clearly figured out that this was going very badly and wanted to distance himself as much as possible. The judge looked at the paperwork again, then back at Linda. "This case is dismissed completely. The defendant's property is not now, nor has it ever been, part of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Ms. Thompson owes you nothing, not one penny." Kelly felt relief flood through her entire body. She almost wanted to cry. It was over. She'd won, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "this court finds that this lawsuit was not only without merit, it borders on malicious prosecution. Ms. Richardson, you are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees and court costs. The clerk will calculate the exact amount, but based on what I'm seeing here, you're looking at a minimum of $8,000. Linda stood up quickly, her voice rising. "Your Honor, that's outrageous. I'm simply trying to maintain community standards and—" "Sit down," the judge said sharply. Linda sat. "Let me be very clear about something," the judge said, his voice hard. "You don't get to make up property boundaries. You don't get to claim jurisdiction over properties that aren't yours. You don't get to threaten people with fines and liens when you have no legal authority. And you definitely don't get to submit altered maps to this court and expect no consequences." He looked at the documents again, particularly the fraudulent map. Kelly could see his jaw tighten. "This map that was submitted as evidence appears to be deliberately falsified. It's not just wrong. It's been intentionally altered to misrepresent the actual HOA boundaries. That's not a mistake. That's fraud. And I'm not going to ignore it." The courtroom was completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Linda's face had gone from red to pale. Her attorney had stopped packing and was staring at the judge with wide eyes. "I'm referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation," the judge said. "They'll determine whether criminal charges are appropriate. But I want to make it clear that this court takes fraud very seriously, especially when it's used to harass innocent citizens." Linda looked like she might faint. She grabbed the table in front of her to steady herself. The judge looked at Linda's attorney. "Counselor, I strongly suggest you get your own attorney. You may have relied on your client's representations, but you still submitted fraudulent documents to this court. The prosecutor may have questions for you as well." The attorney nodded quickly, his face pale. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." Then the judge turned to Kelly and David, his expression softened slightly. "Ms. Thompson, I apologize that you had to go through this. You did everything right. You bought a property, you checked the records, you made sure you weren't buying into an HOA, and then you got harassed anyway. That's not acceptable. In addition to your legal fees, I'm awarding you an additional $500 for your time and stress in dealing with this matter." "Thank you, Your Honor," Kelly managed to say, her voice shaky with relief and emotion. The judge looked back at Linda one more time. "Ms. Richardson, I'm also issuing a restraining order. You are not to contact Ms. Thompson in any way. You are not to go near her property. You are not to send letters, make phone calls, or communicate through any third party. If you violate this order, you will be held in contempt of court. Do you understand? Linda nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor, she said quietly, all her earlier confidence completely gone. The court finds that the plaintiff's legal fees and court costs amount to $8,500, which the plaintiff shall pay to the defendant within 30 days. This court is adjourned. The judge banged his gavel, stood up, and walked out. As soon as he was gone, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Kelly just sat there trying to process what had just happened. It had taken less than 3 minutes for the judge to completely dismantle Linda's case once he looked at the actual evidence. David put his hand on Kelly's shoulder. You okay? Kelly nodded, then actually started laughing. She couldn't help it. All that stress, all those sleepless nights, all that worry about losing her house or having to pay thousands of dollars in fines. And it was over in 3 minutes. The judge had taken one look at the real evidence and shut the whole thing down. I told you it would be spectacular, David said with a grin. Kelly looked over at Linda, who was arguing in harsh whispers with her attorney. The man was shaking his head, clearly telling her he wanted nothing more to do with this case. Some of Linda's supporters had already left, probably embarrassed to be associated with what had just happened. David started packing up his documents. Come on, let's get out of here. You've got some celebrating to do. They walked out of the courtroom together. In the hallway, Rita the surveyor was waiting. She'd come to testify if needed, but obviously that hadn't been necessary. She gave Kelly a big hug. Congratulations. I knew we had a slam dunk case, but that was even better than I expected. Did you see Linda's face when the judge said he was referring it to the prosecutor? Kelly nodded, still feeling a bit stunned by it all. I can't believe it's over. I mean, I knew we were right, but I was still so nervous. That's normal, David said. Even when you know you're right, going to court is stressful. But you did great. You stayed calm. You didn't let them intimidate you, and you let the evidence speak for itself. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. They walked outside into the sunshine. Kelly took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. So what happens now? She asked David. Now we wait for Linda to pay your legal fees. She has 30 days. If she doesn't pay, we can get a judgment against her and even put a lien on her property. But honestly, I think she'll pay. The last thing she wants is more legal trouble on top of whatever the prosecutor decides to do. Do you think they'll actually charge her with fraud? David shrugged. Hard to say. Prosecutors have a lot of discretion. They might decide it's not worth pursuing criminally, or they might make an example out of her. Either way, her reputation is destroyed. Word travels fast in HOA communities. Everyone's going to know what she tried to do and that a judge called her out for fraud. That's probably punishment enough. Kelly nodded. She didn't want Linda to go to jail or anything. She just wanted to be left alone to live, in her house in peace. Thank you so much for everything, she said to David and Rita. I don't know what I would have done without you guys. That's what we're here for, David said. Now go home, put your feet up, and enjoy your blue mailbox and your garden gnomes without worrying about crazy HOA presidents. Kelly laughed. I think I might add a few more gnomes just to celebrate. She drove home feeling lighter than she had in months. When she pulled into her driveway, she sat there for a minute just looking at her house. Her house, with her blue mailbox and her garden decorations and her car parked wherever she wanted it. Nobody could tell her what to do with it. Nobody could threaten her or fine her or try to control how she lived. She got out of the car and walked up to her front door, smiling the whole way. The next few weeks were surprisingly quiet. Kelly kept expecting something else to happen, some other shoe to drop, but nothing did. She went to work, came home, worked in her garden, and enjoyed her peaceful life. It felt almost surreal after all the stress and drama. About 3 weeks after the court hearing, she got a check in the mail. It was from Linda, for the full amount of $8,500. No note, no apology, just the check. Kelly deposited it immediately, and used part of it to pay David's final bill. The rest she put in savings. She figured she'd earned it after everything she'd been through. Then things started getting interesting in ways Kelly hadn't expected. About a month after the court case, she ran into one of her neighbors at the grocery store. A woman named Brenda who lived 3 streets over, inside the actual HOA boundaries. You're Kelly, right? Brenda asked, approaching her in the produce section. From the court case with Linda? Kelly tensed up, not sure if this was going to be friendly or hostile. Yeah, that's me, Brenda smiled. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did was amazing. That woman has been terrorizing our neighborhood for years, and nobody had the guts to stand up to her the way you did. Kelly was surprised. Really? But I thought you were all part of her HOA. I saw some people at the courthouse who I thought were supporting her. Brenda laughed. Oh no, those weren't there to support her. We were there hoping to see her get taken down. And boy, did she ever. Everyone's talking about it. The way the judge called her out for fraud. That was beautiful. I didn't realize she was causing problems for people inside the HOA too, Kelly said. Oh my gosh, you have no idea, Brenda said, shaking her head. She's fined people for having the wrong shade of beige on their houses. She's reported people for parking violations when they were just unloading groceries. She once tried to fine someone $3,000 because their kid left a bike on the front lawn overnight. She's been absolutely horrible, but she's been president for so long that nobody knew how to get rid of her. Well, hopefully things will get better now, Kelly said. Brenda grinned. Actually, that's what I wanted to tell you. We held an emergency HOA meeting last week. We voted Linda out as president. Unanimously. She didn't even show up to the meeting, which made it easier. We elected a new board, and the whole focus is going to be on being reasonable and actually helping the community, instead of just collecting fines and harassing people. Kelly felt genuinely happy to hear that. That's great. I'm glad something good came out of all this mess. It's more than great, Brenda said. People are coming forward with complaints about her that go back years. Apparently, she's been abusing her position as president for a long time, making up rules that weren't in the official HOA documents, threatening people with fines they didn't actually owe, all sorts of stuff. The new board is reviewing everything. Over the next couple of weeks, Kelly heard more stories. Another neighbor stopped by her house one evening, a man named Tom who lived at the edge of the HOA boundary. He brought a bottle of wine and thanked her for standing up to Linda. He told her that Linda had been threatening him for years, claiming his fence was 6 inches over the property line when it wasn't. He'd been too scared to fight her because he couldn't afford a lawyer. But after seeing what happened with your case, Tom said, I got the courage to get my property surveyed. Turns out my fence is exactly where it's supposed to be. Linda was just making stuff up. The new HOA board apologized to me and dropped all the fines she'd tried to charge me. Kelly started to realize that Linda had been doing this to a lot of people. She'd been using her position as HOA president to bully and intimidate people, making up violations and threatening fines that weren't legitimate. And because most people didn't have the money or the knowledge to fight back, she'd gotten away with it for years. About 6 weeks after the court case, Kelly got a call from David. I wanted to give you an update on the Linda situation, he said. What's going on? Well, the prosecutor's office did investigate. They decided not to file criminal charges because proving intent for fraud can be tricky, and they didn't think they could get a conviction, but they did issue her a formal warning. If she ever tries anything like this again with anyone, she'll face criminal charges. So she's not going to jail or anything. No, but that's not the end of the story, David said. The HOA board has actually filed their own lawsuit against her. Turns out she's been misusing HOA funds for years, taking money that was supposed to go to neighborhood maintenance and using it for personal legal fees and other expenses. They're suing her for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of funds. Kelly was shocked. Wow, I had no idea it went that deep. Neither did anyone else until people started digging. But once the new board got access to the financial records, they found all sorts of problems. Linda's probably going to end up paying back a significant amount of money to the HOA. Good, Kelly said. I mean, I don't want to be vindictive or anything, but she put me through so much stress for no reason. It's good that she's facing consequences. Agreed, David said. And there's one more thing. The new HOA board sent you a formal letter of apology. It should arrive in the next day or two. They wanted to make it clear that what Linda did was not representative of the community and that they're committed to being better neighbors. Sure enough, 2 days later, Kelly received a beautifully written letter from the new HOA board president, a woman named Patricia. The letter apologized for Linda's harassment, acknowledged that Kelly's property was absolutely not part of the HOA, and invited her to the next community barbecue as a gesture of goodwill. They also mentioned that they'd implemented new oversight procedures to make sure no future HOA president could abuse their position the way Linda had. Kelly decided to go to the barbecue. She figured it was time to actually meet some of her neighbors properly. It turned out to be really nice. People were friendly and welcoming. Several of them came up to thank her for standing up to Linda. A few people shared their own stories of how Linda had harassed them over the years. "You know what the crazy thing is?" one elderly man told Kelly. "She wasn't always like this. When she first became president 8 years ago, she was actually pretty reasonable. But power went to her head over the years. She started seeing violations everywhere and treating everyone like they were breaking rules on purpose. It got worse and worse until she was basically running the HOA like a dictatorship." Kelly found that sad in a way. Linda had probably started with good intentions, wanting to keep the neighborhood nice. But somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of the fact that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. About 3 months after the court case, Kelly was working in her front garden when she saw a moving truck pull up to a house 3 blocks away. It was Linda's house. Kelly watched as movers loaded furniture and boxes into the truck. She never saw Linda herself. Apparently, she'd already left. Brenda stopped by later that day. "Did you see? Linda's moving out." "Yeah, I saw the truck." "Where's she going?" "Nobody knows. She didn't tell anyone. Just listed her house for sale, accepted the first offer, and left. Honestly, I think she was too embarrassed to stay. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows what she did. She couldn't walk around this neighborhood anymore without people looking at her like she was the villain." Kelly felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was glad Linda was gone. Part of her felt a little bit sorry for her. "Do you think she learned anything from all this?" Brenda shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe. Or maybe she'll just move somewhere else and start over and do the same thing again. But at least she won't be doing it here." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. The new HOA board actually did a good job. They focused on the things that really mattered, like maintaining common areas and organizing community events. They weren't out looking for violations or trying to fine people for having the wrong color mailbox. The whole neighborhood seemed happier and more relaxed. Kelly became friends with several of her neighbors, including Brenda and Tom. They'd have barbecues together, watch out for each other's houses when someone was on vacation, and just generally be good neighbors, which was ironic because that was supposed to be the whole point of an HOA in the first place. One evening, about 6 months after the whole thing started, Kelly was sitting on her front porch with a glass of wine watching the sunset. Her blue mailbox stood proudly at the end of her driveway. Her garden gnomes smiled up at her from the flower beds. Her car was parked wherever she felt like parking it. She thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the fear, the anger, the relief. It had been one of the most difficult things she'd ever dealt with. But she'd stood up for herself. She hadn't backed down when someone tried to bully her. She'd fought for what was right and she'd won. And more than that, her willingness to fight had helped other people too. It had exposed Linda's abuse of power and led to real positive changes in the neighborhood. People were happier. The HOA was functioning better. The community was stronger. Kelly raised her glass in a silent toast to herself, to David and Rita who had helped her, and to everyone else who'd been brave enough to stand up to bullies like Linda. She took a sip of wine and smiled.